to space. Good morning, everyone. I'm welcoming you from Dublin. My name is Anna Kovalenko, and I'm a regional lead for display audiences. Today, I'm here to talk about the brand new product that we're offering, Smart Display Campaigns. And I wonder if some of you have already used them, so you might be a bit familiar, but if you're completely not familiar, don't worry, because today we'll go from the very basics of what this product was created for and what kind of advertising needs does it fulfill, to how to use it correctly and what unique opportunities it offers to you. Before we begin, what I would like to say is, if you have any questions along the way as I'm presenting, please input them into the chat next to the video on the go, because there is a little bit of a delay before that chat reaches me and I'm able to answer those questions. And although I will actually answer the questions at the very end, I do encourage you to drop them into the chat throughout the presentation. All right? Okay, so let's kick off. So what we'll go over today is, first of all, I'll introduce to you this unique campaign type. I will describe to you how exactly it works and what types of targetings it actually combines within itself. Then we will, by all means, touch in detail how do you set it up for success and how you manage it, how you optimize, and then finally we'll actually bring a live example to you and discuss that a little bit. So let's begin. First things first, before we go into the actual campaign type, let's for a moment take a step back and think about why would you be using Google Display Network altogether. And in all fairness, before we discuss why specifically Google Display Network with Google, what I wanted to remind you of is think of how your end customer behaves. In today's modern world, they do not have a single focus on some single action every day, right? If you think of the last purchase that you did you actually buy it in one sitting, in one go? You just went straight into search, you found that, clicked that first ad and immediately bought. That doesn't happen very often, does it? What realistically happens is that we do research, we read reviews, we compare different offerings, compare different websites, and search, for example, is present there a lot because clearly you have a very specific question and you want a quick answer to it. However, this part of the research is when you actually make up your mind on who you will end up buying the service or the product from. So if you think about it, this is where we spend the majority of our time, because only about 4 minutes a day are spent by any given user actually proactively searching, and the remaining time of the day, which is we spend about 12 hours on the internet, if you think about it, we spend watching videos, reading emails, reading things on the display network, reading websites, and so on and so forth. So it's, first of all, it's very critical to understand that if you actually want to make sure that you reach your audience in the best possible way, you need to be present across a variety of platforms. You have to have some presence on video, on websites, on the display network, and on search, because that's where realistically your customers are. Now, when you go into the display network, typically it covers about 95% of any country's population. It has by far globally the largest reach of the population. How do you deal with such complexity? And that is where Smart Display comes to help you, which we'll talk about in a bit more detail a bit later. But what you need to understand is when we create solutions for you to work with the display network, something that we very strongly understand is intent, because we can actually differentiate between behavior where people generally have an interest and they just want to look at something or, say, listen to music, and when they actually have a purchase intent, when they're comparing prices, comparing offerings, trying to book things, right? This indicates a purchase intent. How we go about it is through machine learning. And through machine learning, we analyze this variety, billions and billions of teeny tiny signals, and we bring them into a coherent understanding of what the user wants right now. So machine learning analyzes all of that real time. And then finally, all of that is for the sake of bringing the result that you want. This is where how you bid is really important, because if it's actually the purchases or conversions that you're after, then this is where you actually should be using also smart bidding towards conversions, so that for our machine learning, it's very clear that what you're after is conversions. All right, so this is to set the scene. Now let's get into a bit of ins and outs. So when it comes to working with the display network, there are in principle two ways how you can go about targeting your best perfect audience. The manual way and the automated way, right? The manual way, so I assume that most of you know that Google offers a whole variety of ways to target your customers, from where they are, which would be specific websites and topics of websites, to who they are, right? Which is, well, demographics, which is generally very broad, to going down into interests and intent categories, and then you can actually retarget customers, right? All of that is very complex, which we recognize. And if you think about it, generally what Google's mission is to make world's information organized and universally accessible to everyone. So that is exactly what we're trying to do on the display network with smart display campaigns. Because we understand how complex it is for you to manage display campaigns, we want to make it as simple as possible. So in essence, what a smart display campaign is, it's a completely automated way to go about finding your customers on the display network. We will automate all of the performance targeting, and I'm saying performance, right? Because within the smart display campaign, it targets your returning users. So if you have remarketing lists, it's going to use them. It's going to use all of the intent audiences that are created specifically to drive purchases, right? So intent, custom intent, in market. You see here audience keywords, but audience keywords is actually custom intent audiences. And then similar audiences which are created based off your remarketing lists. So in essence, we combine all of the performance targeting and we just pick the right and best combinations of that and target that real time. All right, so the choice is completely up to you. You can go the manual way if you have a specific audience in mind that you want to target, or you can go the automated way and rely on smart display campaigns to figure it out for you. Final note is that you can actually be doing both. Because what happens a lot is, first of all, what Smart Display offers is completely unique. It's fully automated. So it means that anywhere where your manual campaigns might have a bit of a gap, maybe they're not optimized in the best way, maybe they're not bidding fully automatically, maybe there's something in the remarketing lists, for example, that the size of them went up and down. That's where Smart Display will fill in those gaps and bring the maximum efficiency for you. Because when the manual campaign, for example, wouldn't be as efficient to target your customer, then the Smart Display campaign will fill in that gap and show the ad to your potential best customer. I hope it makes sense. And if you do have any questions, please input them now and I'll address them at the end. All right, let's go further. Now, let's go into the ins and outs, what a Smart Display campaign is in essence. So it's fully automated bidding, fully automated targeting, and automated creatives. All right. And as we do all of that automation, we also give you a couple of reporting pieces that are not available in other display campaigns, which I will demonstrate to you later. But in essence, for example, when we test out different combinations of creatives, what we give you later in reporting is which of them performed best, worst, or which was an average performing one. All right, so let's go into this. So just to summarize, what the Smart Display campaign does target and what it doesn't target. Okay, because I mentioned that it targets all of display's targeting, but only the one that's created for driving conversions. So in essence, it targets mid and lower funnel, right? So if you're thinking who is a good fit for such a type of a campaign, that is pretty much any advertiser who, let's say, is doing a bit of very specific keywords in search and is doing a bit of broader keywords in search, right? That is an equivalent of what a Smart Display campaign is, that it targets the very, very low funnel and remarketing is there at the bottom of the funnel. And it also brings a bit of new audiences to feed that funnel. What it doesn't target, though, is something that's the very top of the funnel that's typically reserved for branding, right? So something like affinity audiences are created for reach and for brand reach, so they're not part of a Smart Display campaign. And here, let me give you my top practical tip. This is where Smart Display campaigns are uniquely positioned to be this type of campaign that's always on and that picks up on any additional activity that you do. What I mean by this is, for example, this summer season is coming and you actually want to launch some sort of a brand promo targeting audiences, explaining to them that you have this, whatever, new summer service or a new line of clothing or whatever it is that your business offers. So if you have that upper funnel advertising, that will bring a set of new qualified audiences to your website. but not all of them will convert immediately. They will take a while to consider, think, and eventually buy. So what then happens, that feeds the smart display campaign, and that smart display campaign picks up that audience then, and then brings it down the funnel with the help of those performance audiences and remarketing, and at the very end converts them. So that's where it's brilliantly positioned to be complementary to any other broader branding activity that you have, regardless of the platform, all right? Now, to be eligible for a smart display campaign, because I mentioned that it's automated bidding as well, right? So generally, when you start with a smart display campaign, you're bidding on a Target CPA basis. So you pay per acquisition, right? So we need to have a bit of conversion history to learn from. And it doesn't matter from which platform that conversion history comes from. So what it means is that you will start seeing a smart display functionality in the account once you have 50 search conversions, 100 search conversions or 50 display conversions, right? So this said, if you've only had search campaigns and you're getting about 100 conversions a month, that is a great starting point for us, will allow you to be creating a smart display campaign, because this means that we have enough data to start automating things, and we have already learned from past performance and how you got those conversions, and so we can go after finding similar great conversions on the display network for you. All right. And so generally, let me just reinforce the point that what a smart display campaign is meant to do is simplify your life, right? If you want to, you can be creating manual campaigns alongside. That is completely up to you. If you have the time, if you have a certain strategy, promotion, so on and so forth. But at the same time, this particular campaign will just make you put minimal effort into its creation, minimal effort into its management. And once you set it up, as long as you set it up correctly, just leave it be and check into it after a couple of weeks, see if anything needs to be optimized, but then just let it run. Okay, so it's pretty self-sustainable. Okay. Now, moving on. So in terms of how a smart display campaign works, so here is where we're going into nitty-gritty details, right? So first of all, as for the bidding, it uses Target CPA as a starting point. Then the campaign budget is actually very important in the sense, because what you need to ensure is that your starting Target CPA bid is realistic, right? So it means that it should at least be the CPA that you have been able to achieve with search, right? Then the budget proportionally depends on that Target CPA. So what we suggest is, for proper reach, you want to reserve about a budget which is 10 times the size of the Target CPA. The reason for that is purely that you need to give it a bit of data to learn. So you want to ensure that you can get between 2 to 10 conversions a day, because that's going to allow the smart display campaign to continue learning. And then critically important, the assets themselves, because we'll automate how we serve the assets. However, the initial content is up to you. And that is the part where you need to put a lot of good thought and a lot of good effort to make sure that those creative assets are very strong and of high quality. Okay, so in terms of smart bidding, first things first, something that you need to understand is that smart bidding is completely critical to the performance of any display campaign. That's why it's a starting point for a smart display campaign, right? Display network is so large. As I mentioned, it targets 95% of the population. Imagine how many websites are there. So globally, we have about 2 million partners on the display network. And then think of all of the audience signals that are there, out of which we create audiences. If you try to manage this complexity manually, the likelihood of being very successful is very, very low. So you need to rely on smart bidding, right? So the scale, the machine learning, that's something that's unique. And another point that I want to reinforce here is that all of this learning for smart bidding, we do real time, in a blink of an eye, right? Because all of the data sits within the data centers, and we invest a lot into its quality. And so therefore, we try to bring that quality to you as a result of smart bidding. And then finally, Google's data sets are unique, right? And they're collected real time, and they're updated real time. That's why we can differentiate when an audience is very unique and useful. So we'll try our best to target it and convert for you. Or if it's actually the person is not interested anymore, so then we drop it and we do not waste any of your money onto targeting someone who is not of high value to you anymore. All right. When it comes to creatives, here's where it gets incredibly interesting. So when you create a smart display ad, you have the capability to upload up to 5 headlines, 5 texts, 15 images, and 5 logos. And here's where I'm going to share a couple of really valuable practical pieces of advice with you. So first of all of these assets are matched between themselves, right? So when you create those 5 varieties of headlines and 5 varieties of ad texts, make sure that they can be combined, right? That it will make sense if one headline is combined with a description line number 5 and so on and so forth. If you have a website where you sell a whole variety of products, right, this is where you might actually benefit from attaching your dynamic feed to this campaign, because then we will not only use this regular smart display ad, which consists of those sort of 5 assets, but we will also use the remainder of your product information that you usually put into a feed for your dynamic remarketing campaigns, and we will reinforce that smart ad with that as well, right? So another thing that's important is that think about a user who sees your ad. It's very, very, very important that it's very clear for the user what is it that you're selling. Because I think sometimes we tend to overthink a little bit and we try to have some sort of a creative message to catch people's attention, but it doesn't touch upon your product at all. That won't really work here. That's great for branding, but that's not great for performance, because if you want to drive conversions, it kind of has to be quite clear the first time I look at the ad, what is it that you're selling? This will also allow you to avoid people clicking on the ad when they aren't really interested in the product just because the ad was catchy, right? So try to be very clear. And now, when it comes to the variety of 15 images, please make it a variety. So if you think about it, let's say it's houses that you're selling, right? You're in the real estate business and you want people to call you to maybe submit leads, come talk to you about this apartment. Now, who can be buying that house? This can be men, women, this can be young people, older people, families, single people, right? So within those 15 images, try to represent a different variety of, people on that ad, or a different variety of houses, because realistically, you can't really possibly know which exactly will be the most efficient. And that's what the Smart Display Campaign will test for you. So upload a variety of different images and let Smart Display Campaign test it out for you. Okay. And then finally, what's also really important is your logo. Okay. So your business name and the logo are very important, critical pieces, because first of all, it actually does add to the memorability of the ad. So people will start remembering your business. And then secondly, it gives credibility to the ad, because I see what product is sold. I see the logo. I see the business name. So I know that generally when we're working with the display network, we're used to optimizing all of these different things like websites and bids and doing that every day. That is the part that the Smart Display Campaign removes from you completely. So you can save your time there. You don't need to be doing those manual optimizations. But that initial asset that you create, that is the part where you need to spend the most time. Make it outstanding. Make it an ad that a user who's really interested will never forget and will actually come to your website and convert. And finally, before we move on, what I also wanted to reinforce here is that, see at the slide at the very bottom, it says, we do creative testing across billions of combinations for you. So billions might seem terrifying, and you might think that I'm not really being very truthful or whatever. But that's the reality of it, because think about it. Multiply the 5 headlines, 5 descriptions, 15 images, 5 logos. How many combinations of purely the content you have? That's 1,875. Now, that's just the combination of the assets that you gave us, right? Think about how many sizes and types of ads there are on the display network. Some of you haven't read the Help Center might think that it's about 30 or 50. The reality is that it's a couple of thousand, right? It's just maybe the 50 are the most common sizes, but it's actually 2,000 plus of different sizes of ads on the display network. Now, multiply the 1,875 by the couple of thousand of different sizes and varieties of ads on the display network. That adds up to billions of combinations, right? So in a moment, we will talk about expectation setting, which is you need to let the campaign learn for a couple of weeks. A couple of weeks might seem like a long time, but if you think about how long it would take you to manually test out all of these combinations of ads, that would have taken you years. That is the scale that we managed to work for you on, right? So we take it from years of manual learning to just a couple of weeks where we tested real time thanks to machine learning. All right, so that's the brilliance of that, even the single smart creative on the display network. All right, now moving on, setting up for success. So let's say we have our assets in place, they're great. How do we actually go about picking that right bid? How do we optimize that campaign? And what do we do after? Do we wait, or do we kind of go every day and make little tweaks here and there? All right, so first things first, if you have that right volume of conversions, as we mentioned, 100 search conversions per month or 50 display conversions per month, you will be able to create a smart display campaign, right? So you click on a plus campaign, display network, and then once you select drive action, one of the options here will be a smart display campaign, as you see here. Now, once you start creating it, the first thing we'll ask you to do is choose your starting Target CPA bid, and of course the budget, right? So this is very crucial, all right? Because the bid has to be realistic. So if you are an advertiser who has just worked with search before, we usually suggest that you take the average CPA that you've gotten from those search campaigns, exclude brand keywords. Very important, because brand keywords is such a low funnel. The customer was already looking for you anyway, and they're just clicking on that brand keyword ad and they go straight to your website. So exclude those from your calculations because they're a bit misleading in terms of what's realistic to attain. So take your, say, generic search campaigns, add 50% on that, and that is your very safe starting point as a Target CPA bid on display. Let that not scare you, okay? Because we're in no way trying to buy expensive conversions or something. What's going to happen is that we will go after the most accessible, quickest, cheapest conversions first, and then this higher CPA bid will allow us, once we exhaust these, we go a little bit up the funnel and we find new audiences where that cost per acquisition may be a bit higher, and so on and so forth within that CPA bid that you gave us. All right? Now, if you have already run display campaigns, then you can take your remarketing campaign cost per conversion, add about 20 to 50% on top of that, and that should be a good starting point for a smart display campaign as well. And then if you have already had mid or upper funnel display campaigns and you have gotten conversions out of them, so you have a certain kind of benchmark mid-funnel cost per acquisition, then just take that as the starting point for a smart display campaign. Now, a practical advice again. So what will happen if you pick a bid that's unrealistic? So what you will observe is that the campaign will kick on first and it's going to go and try its best at finding those conversions at that CPA that you gave us across the display network. And then if it's confident that it can find them, but they're quite rare because the expectation is a bit too high from us, then you will see traffic drop and be sort of very low, but the campaign will continue running. But in cases where the expectation was just completely unrealistic, after that initial attempt to find those conversions for you, a smart display campaign will just stop. So you will see a complete drop of traffic, and then the campaign is just not spending anymore, right? Because we do not want to waste your money, right? So if the expectation was unrealistic, we have seen that we won't be able to deliver those conversions, we'll stop spending. Okay, so just to reinforce that the starting CPA is incredibly important for the success of a smart display campaign. If you guys have any questions, please post them in now, because I can imagine that this seems pretty straightforward, but if you have any specific other things that you'd like me to go over when it comes to selecting the bid, please let me know. All right, and then the budget, as I had briefly touched upon before, again, it has to ensure that there's enough room for the smart display campaign to be delivering at least a couple of conversions per day for you, right? So if you think about it, smart display combines remarketing and reaching new audiences, right? So you have to be ready to go into it. So you have to be ready to dedicate some good resource into it. And that's why our recommendation is that your budget should be 10 times your target CPA, because you kind of want to achieve at least 10 conversions per day out of that campaign, right? Okay. And then in terms of assets, so like I mentioned, yes, you upload 5 headlines, 5 description lines. Then you add a landing page. Now, as something that's not on this slide, but that I strongly advise is if you have a multitude of services or a multitude of products on your website, in campaign settings, attach a dynamic feed, because then that will allow us to run not only dynamic remarketing for you within that campaign, but also the so-called dynamic prospecting, which is this is a type of, you can use dynamic ads when you're targeting similar audiences, right? So clearly you can use dynamic ads when you're remarketing people who have already seen your products, but we can also use that feed, and through machine learning, if we know that anyone on your similar audience list is looking for, say, specifically this variety of a service or of a product, we will pick out that product from your dynamic feed and serve them exactly this product that they're looking for, all right? So that is also a very cool add-on into a smart display campaign, is a feed that will all of a sudden give the capability for a smart display campaign to not only learn from your main landing page, but also from these thousands of other products and thousands of other landing pages, or hundreds perhaps, that you have on your website. Okay. Now, after the smart display campaign finishes learning, it will actually give you an overview of which of those assets were worst and best performing. Okay, so just have a quick look at the slide. You see that one of the headlines has a performance tag best, the other one has good, and then there's also a status of waiting, right? So while the smart display campaign is learning, it will have the status of learning or waiting. So this means that, okay, just let it continue learning, because once it finishes, you will see that status. The moment you start seeing that some of the creatives have the best tag, that is great actually, because you can use that to make the ads in your search or display or video campaign stronger, right? Because a smart display campaign real-time tested that out of the variety of 5 headlines, this specific call to action makes the audience respond to you the best and the most efficient way. So you take that headline and you plug it into your search campaign ads. All right. And then amongst all of the images, so as I advised you, take a variety of them, right? So plug a human on one, a human of a different age and gender on another one, maybe some other ad you have without humans altogether, just your product, for example. And then just let it test which of those resonate with your buyers in the best way. And once you have the status there, okay, this is best, this is poor, you can then use the best ads in other, best images in other campaigns. And then in terms of the smart display campaign, the ones that are rated poorly, as in their worst performing, replace them with something else. So feel free to eliminate that and just replace it with a different variation of an image. All right. And in terms of waiting, right? So this is as important as picking that starting Target CPA bid, because machine learning typically requires about 2 weeks on the average to run its algorithms, right? This is the same requirement that you have for smart bidding altogether, for Target CPA, Target return on ad spend. So we ask you to give us 2 weeks to run our algorithms. However, a very small caveat here. If you have a product that has a long purchase cycle, then you might need to consider to add that purchase cycle to this waiting period, right? So let's say you're selling kind of cruises, and you know that people start planning for it now, but they might be taking a couple of weeks to research. So maybe then give the smart display campaign not 2 weeks to learn, but say 3 or 4 weeks before you start making any changes. But overall, a good indicator whether it's time or not to make changes is that status of learning, right? So if the status is learning, then it means just give it a bit more time and then start assessing performance. Right. Now, you see here, there's a teeny tiny caveat on this website, on the slide. It says, if setup is consistent with best practices. This is also important because if you pick a Target CPA bid that's too low, or you give it a small budget, like maybe your budget is equal to the Target CPA, this is not enough resource for it to learn properly. So you might see that learning hanging in there for over 4 weeks. So if that's what's going on, then just revisit and make sure that the campaign is set up in line with best practices. And finally, just be confident. If it is set up with best practices, it's going to learn very quickly. Okay? That's what we see with any customers that we work with smart display campaigns. Okay. Now, when it comes to optimization. So I assume you will have a couple of questions, because what do we typically optimize on? We think of websites where we show, we think of managing bids daily, and then we think of ads as well. So let's actually go over which of those pieces, how you can manage if you're trying to optimize a smart display campaign. So first things first, in its learning phase, just let it run. Please don't touch it, right? Because if you start adding or removing things in the process of a smart display campaign learning, we will have to restart learning. And then you're just postponing that moment when you get the final result. Okay, so in those first couple of weeks when it's just starting, just let it run. Secondly, when it comes to managing websites, for example. So let's say after a while, you see in the placements report on which placements you have shown. Generally, what we advise is to not attempt to remove placements manually. And within the Smart Display campaign, you actually won't be able to do it. The reason for that is we ensure that the quality of the display network is high, and any placements we run on, the reason for that is to bring the conversion for you, right? So the only reason realistically to be excluding placements is if you have any particular brand preferences. I don't know, maybe you're very politically neutral and you do not want to be shown in the context of any political content, for example, right? So what you can do then is in the shared library, add those exclusions of those specific websites that you personally are uncomfortable with in the shared library account level exclusions. And then none of your display campaigns will ever run on those websites. Okay? But that is the only time that we do recommend to be excluding placements is your personal brand preferences. But otherwise, for performance, you do not to be doing it. And what's actually happening when we start excluding websites on a mass scale because we consider that that's not where you get the conversions from, your conversion volume can fall. The reason for that is that very often a user will transition, do research on one website, and then potentially go and purchase after a certain other website. So this research website in the process of the research is really important for that conversion to happen. And if you remove it because you see zero conversions coming from it, you will break that conversion path and you might not get that end result, okay? So that is the reason why the capability to be sort of removing websites from this campaign is disabled, because our research very strongly shows that that actually hurts the result instead of helping it, okay? Now, for the changes, so as I mentioned, within the learning phase, limit those changes, right? Not limit, but I'd say try not to make any changes. Set up that healthy campaign, launch it, do other things, you know, just focus on your strategy after the campaign runs, and try not to make any changes. And then after it's finished learning, that's when you evaluate the results, and then maybe you make little gradual changes here and there. Right. So one other thing to note is that when we were talking about creatives, I mentioned that if some creatives have a status of poor, then replace them with a new one, right? But try to refrain from replacing everything in the ad, because if you replace all of the elements in the ad, then again, that's going to kick the machine learning into a learning phase and we'll have to start learning again. And again, let me then here add another deeper best practice in terms of how you structure this campaign. Because again, if you're a website who has a variety of different offerings, a single smart display ad might not be enough for you, right? Because let's assume you sell travel packages, right? And let's assume you have Thailand, you have Germany, you have Africa, you have North America. Those are clearly very different products, right? Clearly a different cost per acquisition, a different revenue for you, and different content as well, right? So your first smart display ad can be a more generic, as in travel tours, we offer best packages, and so on and so forth. But then you can create another creative where you specifically lead people onto the part of your website that is about travel to North America, right? And make the content of that smart ad everything about North America, and so on and so forth, right? So you can have sort of a couple of ads that specifically lead into various different services or products that you sell. No need to diversify, no need to create 100 of those ads, right? Because the moment you start creating more than 5 different varieties, ask yourself if it's time to add a dynamic feed. That's what the dynamic feed is there for. But if it's just a couple of categories on your website, then feel free to just add a couple of different smart display ads. And finally, that's also a tip to optimize a smart display campaign, because let's say you have a feed, but you're not ready to attach it because maybe you're doing some work on it. So you can kick off the smart display campaign as it is with its ads, and then at a later point add the feed, and you will see how it's going to boost the performance of the smart display campaign, right? So it's the same thing. Let's say you start having a new category of a product on your website. That's brilliant. Just create a new asset, create a new ad where you describe that specific category of a product. That's the way to optimize a smart display campaign. Not with tapping with the bids and websites and all of that every day, but by adding new creative content, because then this allows the smart display campaign, out of those thousands of combinations of best audiences, to have a bit more relevant content, right? So maybe previously with just your generic ads, we were mostly sort of targeting, say, 3-5 categories of an audience. And now additional content allows us to tap into these other new segments or create those segments ourselves, because that content will be very relevant to that audience. So I've been talking a lot in this part. I hope it makes sense. And please, guys, please do add your questions now, because I can imagine that if you're hearing this for the first time, this might sound mind-boggling. So please add your questions. All right. And then in terms of the CPA bid, so let's say that it's been learning for a while, it's finished learning, you see a great result, and you kind of want to see what you do next with the bid. So in terms of lowering it or raising it, just try to stick to 20% at a time, because again, if you significantly lower it or significantly raise it, that's going to be a bit of a shock to the system, and it, again, will kick off back into learning mode. You can leverage the bid simulator, right? That's available for you on ad group level. And then when you click into that little graphy icon, you will see our predicted impact on conversions if you raise the CPA bid, or again, predicted decline of conversions if you reduce the CPA bid. So that is available at hand for you in the AdWords interface, so feel free to use it at your convenience. And for the creatives, we actually already spoke about it, so just to reinforce that once the system finishes learning, you will see which creatives were best, good, or worst performing, and which, for example, were still learning. Right. That's all for the theoretical part. And now we'd like to bring just one example of a case study. So it's a company that has global presence, right? So Secret Escapes is present globally, and they've generally been working with us with search and with remarketing, right? But they haven't really tapped into that mid-funnel audiences. And now what they've tried to do is, first of all, they've tested the Smart Display campaign in one specific country, right? So they started with Italy, but they also they were also advertising for United States. So you will see eventually they went into advertising United States as well, but they started with a smaller country. And then they optimized the campaign in line with, as I had just described to you. And then finally, they saw that it's performing great, and they started creating Smart Display campaigns per every new country. Now, what I want you to take out of this, right, is if you are present in a couple of different countries, yes, you can target a couple of countries within that one Smart Display campaign, but mind that, let's say, the audiences who live in Italy and the audiences who live in America are probably very different, right? So it might be a good idea to actually have those in separate campaigns, because what's also plays a role here is the competitive landscape of that country. Maybe it's easier for you to get customers in Italy, but much harder in the United States because it's more competitive. So this is also something to consider, that it might not be wise to use exactly the same CPA bid in all of these countries and plug them all into one campaign, because it will take a while for the system to learn, because it's a huge audience to target. So best maybe split them out. And in the country where you know that generally it's easier for you to get customers, it's okay to have a lower target CPA. And in a country where it's harder, or maybe you're just tapping into the market, be more patient there, have a very strong creative, and have a high target CPA bid, because you kind of want to give the opportunity for the system to figure out how to target that audience in this competitive country for you. All right, and then in terms of results, right? So the result of this Smart Display campaign, it gave these incremental new conversions at a cost that was 20% lower compared to other prospecting campaigns that Secret Escapes has run every now and then. So what it tells you is, it tells you about that power of automation. And as I mentioned earlier, is that you can be running your manual and Smart Display campaigns side by side, and just be mindful that where your manual campaign is already optimized well enough, it hits the right audience with the right message, so clearly it's going to have a preference in winning auctions. However, where this campaign is not efficient, or the audience that you're targeting is quite narrow, that's when Smart Display campaign will do its magic, automate the bids, automate the creatives, and target those new segments of audience that you have never reached before manually. So that's why you can get actually cheaper conversions, although seemingly you're targeting prospecting. You're prospecting for new people. All right. And then, so here another scale into additional regions, as I mentioned. So indeed, it was much easier for Secret Escapes to get customers in, say, Italy, right? But it was harder to get those customers in the United States. And although they got really good result in both places, that difference in the cost per acquisition was different, right? So say in a big market that uplift in conversions was about 10%, whereas in the smaller markets that uplift was over 100%, right? So this just speaks to the fact that a Smart Display campaign, in essence, is a reality check of how easy it is for you to get those customers. So even by running it running the Smart Display campaign in 2 separate countries, you will learn something about that audience. You will understand that, oh, okay, here it's much easier to convince them, and that's what works best. And here it's harder to convince them. Okay, maybe I need to think about a bigger resource or a stronger creative, or maybe I need to think about running a video campaign to accompany that Smart Display campaign because I need to really put a lot of effort into convincing those audiences. Okay? All right. That actually brings us to the end of the whole theoretical part and presentation part of what a Smart Display campaign is, how to optimize it, how to manage it. You can try to launch it today. My best advice is don't launch it until you have a very strong creative, right? So really give it a thought into what images you plug in, what calls to action you have, and all of that. And if you have the right volume of conversions in your account, then try to launch that campaign today. Good luck. Now it's time for questions. So let me just move on to a different file. All right, and we have a whole bunch of them. All right, great, great. So let's take it one by one. A question from Jasmine. It says, I tried a similar smart bidding for search intent campaigns, but they didn't work very well at all because they are learning, so they weren't showing ads. Would this be the same? So generally, if your smart bidding is learning for a very long time, it means that either the volume of conversions is very low or the CPA bid that you started it with is very low. Right? So my best advice, if it's learning for a while, then do give it a higher target CPA bid to kickstart that learning, right? To give it a bit more room to learn. So don't be sort of too narrow when you're starting, because that's going to actually hurt the performance of smart bidding altogether. And like I said, so maybe it's also a matter of expectations, because yes, it's going to be learning, and it's going to be learning for about 2 weeks. Plus, if you have a long purchase cycle of a product, then add that a little bit to your waiting period as well. So generally, this first initial 2-3 weeks of learning, yes, it's learning. But again, think of the trade-off of how long it would you would have to test things and different combinations of things manually to get to the same result. So yes, it's smart bidding, so it's going to behave in the very similar way. So just know these best practices, how to start it, and be patient while it's learning, and then just let it be. Something that I would want to just add here to give you a peace of mind, right? So I actually have my own little test account where I invest $1 a day per campaign type. And in there, because it's just $1 a day, it's actually too small of a resource for a smart display campaign. However, my conversions are really easy to reach. So funny enough, I have sort of a high starting CPA bid. I have a tiny budget, and I always see the learning status. But I know exactly why I see it. The reason I see it is because the resource that I give to the campaign is too low. But this said, it's always learning, but it's performing well, right? Because generally my conversions are easy to reach. So it's sort of going and delivering those conversions. But unfortunately, I can't see the results of which assets is performing best or worst because the resource that I gave the campaign is too low. All right. So a question from Vaibhav is there a way to manage placements manually? So not inside of the campaign, but you can exclude placements that you deem inappropriate for your brand on account level in the shared library. It's account level placements exclusions. This was launched specifically with the launch of Smart Display campaigns. And once you input placements there, that's going to apply to all of display campaigns in this account. Okay. So Christina, will there ever be a way to add exclusion lists? That's my biggest struggle with this product. So generally no, because the thing here is that a Smart Display campaign doesn't have a specific goal to keep targeting lists. The only reason for it to be targeting people is because it sees that those people convert, right? So this said, for example, so Christina, apologies, I don't know what business you're running, right? But let's say that you are selling, I don't know, a simple example, shoes, right? And someone has bought shoe already, so you kind of want to stop showing ads to them. But remember that there's an ability to upsell, right? So if Smart Display chooses to keep targeting these people, it means that it sees that they will buy more or they will buy a complementary product. That's like I'm saying where this dynamic feed will help, because maybe they won't buy the specific shoe, but they will buy shoelaces or whatever it is, a complementary product that goes with it, all right? Also, trust the Smart Display campaign. It is indeed the way the algorithm works is, let's say you're selling software that only works on desktop. A Smart Display campaign will be able to learn and stop showing on those devices where your product cannot be installed, right? So for a while, it might try to run on everything, but then the moment it learns that all of your clients, let's say, are on desktop, it's just going to stop running on, say, mobile traffic altogether, right? So this is where you do need to rely on it, because the thing is, if there's no possibility of a conversion whatsoever, Smart Display campaign has no reason to target that audience. If there is that possibility, although you might not have thought of it yourself, then it will go about targeting this audience. And that is just literally a reality check of what we would do manually compared to what machine learning knows about your audience. Perhaps something worth mentioning here is that is why what you track as your conversion action is very, very, very important, okay? Because if your conversion is a bit vague, we'll be optimizing towards the highest volume of conversions at this cost per acquisition, right? So that might not be the best idea. So consider, let's say, if you are a retail business that you're tracking the purchases, and it's okay to be having your cart abandoners is sort of as a conversion as well, to have a bigger volume. All of those are related to sales. If you're a type of a business where you don't actually have a particular action to track, then try to rely on smart goals from Google Analytics, because those are, again, automatically learned best users with the best behavior, most engaged behavior on your website, and optimize for those. But if your conversion action is something like 3 pages visited per visit, that is not necessarily a very reliable thing, because anyone can visit 3 pages. It actually doesn't speak to their purchase intent. So just give it a very good thought on what exactly type of a conversion you're optimizing for, and that's going to guide the Smart Display campaign on who it should target and whom it shouldn't target. All right. Michal is asking, I would like to control if the Smart Display campaign is targeting visitors of my website or not, or at least to report it. Would it be possible in the future? So, Michal, this is a fantastic question. So stay tuned, because yes, we will be surfacing many more insights in the Smart Display campaign as we go, right? So at the moment, it seems like the main thing it reports on is the results of assets, but we're considering in the future to start reporting on the types of content that it runs on as well. You might, if you work with Google, if you have an account manager from the Google side who works with you, ask that question to them. They might actually be able to help and give you a bit of an insight on what it's running on. But then just something, guys, to be mindful of, if you can create a Smart Display campaign in an account that doesn't have remarketing lists. If you don't have remarketing lists, a Smart Display campaign does not have the right to be remarketing, right? So it's just going to be running on new audiences for you. If that's your goal, sure, go with it. But just be mindful that because these are new audiences, your expectation of a cost per acquisition should be higher, right? Because remarketing clearly has the cheapest conversion because it's re-engaging users who already know you. And if you're targeting new audiences, that do adjust your expectation of that cost per acquisition. All right, question from Lise. How does Google determine which in-market audiences, affinity audiences, and custom intent audiences to use for Smart Display? And how does Google know which are the right for my business? Great question. Now, a couple of corrections here. Affinity audiences are not part of Smart Display campaign, so that is something that we don't work with. But in terms of everything else, how does it determine which audiences to work with and what's best for your business? A couple of things. First of all, as I mentioned, the reason we need 50 or 100 conversions to start from is because that is exactly the information that we learn from. So now, guys, have you ever looked at audience insights of your remarketing lists? That is your simplest way to understand what exactly Smart Display is doing. If you're collecting remarketing lists and you go to the shared library and you click into that list, you will see audience insights. You will see of the people, say, who bought your product, what in-market categories are they in? What interest categories are they in? What is their demo composition? What is their gender composition, right? That is exactly what a Smart Display is using. It looks at your previous buyers, and then it discovers that, okay, yeah, those segments are my most powerful ones. So these are the ones that I'll go and work with first. Now, once it's worked with those segments and it kind of wants to keep looking for those new conversions for you, it's going to start projecting, right? So it's going to look at, okay, there's this subset of custom intent audiences on the internet that behave exactly the way that your buyers do. So it's going to go after those. And now, even within remarketing lists, what a Smart Display does, it never just bluntly uses the remarketing list that you gave us. Within that, we will be doing some smart learning all the time. So out of those, all visitors of your website, we will pick those pockets who were the most engaged and work with those first. All right? And then it literally, when it comes to those performance audiences, it can create any combinations possible. But then again, it only starts doing that once it's learned from your existing buyers. Okay. Moving slightly down. So Arturus is asking, why when I pause manual campaigns with keyword targeting, after 2-3 days, Smart Display campaign results with conversion decrease? So that actually shouldn't be the case. I don't think that's necessarily the reason for a Smart Display campaign. The only reason I might be thinking of, if your keyword targeting campaign it has a very large budget and it's attracting a lot of audience, and then all of a sudden you stop that campaign, so you stop the flow of that audience. So that is when you might, that might impact the Smart Display campaign because you stop the flow of a new audience, right? But this said, if you just leave the Smart Display campaign be, it will pick up because it sees that there's now a gap in the audience, so it's going to start creating and targeting that audience manually, right? So Arturus, again, what I assume is happening is that your keywords targeting campaign on display was really well set up and you were bringing a lot of good audience. So Smart Display campaign was not tapping into that because it just stepped away and let that manual campaign do its job. When you stopped that opened the way for, so first of all, it resulted in an initial drop of conversions because you just stopped a big audience. So then eventually Smart Display campaign will start learning and tap into this kind of targeting that you just stopped in the manual campaign. I hope it makes sense. Okay. And now the question from Avi is about policies. So are there any restrictions which are different to standard display ads, example, alcohol, etc.? No difference whatsoever. All of the policy rules that apply on the display network is exactly what applies in Smart Display campaigns. So again, if you're a type of business who needs to have some sort of a disclaimer inside your ad, for example, you offer loans and you need to report on what is the percentage that you pay on a loan, right? So you're required by law to do that, which means that we're required to ask you to have that in your ads to get approval from. Then when creating that Smart Display ad, just make sure to add that content in every single piece of it, right? So make sure that that content is present in the headline, in the description line, and then you'll be fine. But the rules are exactly the same. Now, Guy is asking, will there be a machine learning optimization for custom events or my website events like Universal App Campaign does now? So again, Guy, this all boils down to your conversion. So with Google Analytics, you can set up goals to track events, right? So I think the most common example is I want to track that a person looked at videos or a person sort of clicked on this certain part of the website, pressed on this button or whatever it is. If you set that up as the conversion action you're tracking, then that's what Smart Display will use for optimization. So whatever you do with conversions, that's what Smart Display campaign will optimize for. Okay, another question from Lise. Do Smart Display campaigns take into account the data from previous Smart Display campaigns in the same account? So, Lise, to take it even one step further, it's not the specific campaigns it learns from. It learns from your website performance, right? The moment you plug in, so first of all, you've had 100 conversions in the account. That's what we'll take as our starting learning point. Secondly, you plug in your URL into the smart ad. So when we're learning, what we'll do is we'll analyze the composition and the behavior of the audience on your website on that URL that you gave us. And that's going to be sort of the data that we'll learn from. So your previous Smart Display campaign will be, yes, another component of this learning, but it's not necessarily the campaign that we take, but rather overall the behavior of the audience on the website. And that actually touches upon your previous question where you said, which are right for my business? So that's what we'll learn from your website. We'll understand what the audience behaves like on your website. And we don't even necessarily need to know how specifically audiences in retail differ from audiences in real estate, because that's what we'll learn from the people on your website. All right. A question from Sohan is, what type of a budget? That we actually answered. So please just go back after and just check the recommendations that we've covered before. Question from Alexandra is, how are different bids from different advertisers prioritized? Who served first? So great question. Best quality is served first, right? So on the display network, something to be wary of is that the bid is generally actually determined by the publisher, right? So publishers have, like on the average, let's say, my best recommendation if you didn't know what to start from, consider a CPC bid of $1 if you were having a manual campaign. Just like take one as your benchmark, start with that, and then you'll be able to lower or increase the bid. But try to avoid having too low of a bid for the reason that you're competing against a lot of advertisers who also want to serve on this website, right? So with the low bid, you might be unfortunately missing out on those really kind of useful auctions for you, which means that your kind of quality score that you build up for that display ad is sort of low. And then that will determine that you will be losing a lot of auctions because the quality score that you built up is low. So for that reason, this, as I mentioned a couple of times already, that a high starting target CPA bid is so important, because you show anytime that we deem as it's very useful to show, because the user is very valuable, it's your potential customer. You make sure to show to them. That builds up a stronger quality score. And that also means that that's when you start winning those auctions much more often. All right. So in terms of who's served first, that depends on the quality. A small tip here, how you can determine the quality of your ads. On ad group level, you can add a column that comes from competitive metrics, and the column is called relative CTR. Relative CTR is a meaningful metric on display. CTR is not that meaningful, okay? Relative CTR shows how often, if you and some other advertiser were shown on the same website, do people prefer to click on your ads compared to that other person's ads, right? So if your relative CTR is above 100%, that means that the quality of your ad is high. If it's below 100%, it means that the quality of your ad is low, all right? So then try to do something about your ad or raise the bid if you see that the quality is low. All right. Amit is asking, run shopping campaign. Unfortunately, I don't understand that question. And let me think. We have a whole variety of questions. So guys, I won't be able to answer all of them, and I'm glad that there's such a high interest. So then I'll do my best to perhaps answer them on the video link itself. We do have another 5 minutes, so I'll just take it one by one. So there's an ask for a demo link to test and practice the display ad. So that, you know, if you create a campaign and it's paused, right, then you can test whatever you want, because until you launch it, it's not actually live. Look into the Help Center, because the Help Center gives screenshots and a step-by-step guidance. All right. A question from Lee, I like this one. Is it worth creating a specific product feed for Smart Display, or just use an existing product feed that is also used from Merchant Center? Fantastic question, because currently we've actually disabled the capability to attach a Merchant Center feed. So what you need to do is download that feed and upload it back as a business data feed, which is pretty much a CSV file. So just mark for yourself business data feed and browse for that on the AdWords Help Center. Now, the reason for that is that generally Merchant Center is sort of very strict with the requirements of how the feed needs to be built, because it's the shopping requirements. For remarketing in itself, there is actually much more flexibility. And in a business data feed, there are a lot of things that you can influence proactively. So that's why we recommend creating that business data feed. Like, for example, you can even influence sort of similar IDs of products that you would like to show alongside with this product. Anyways, it's a fantastic new world. Read about this in the Help Center. So I would actually recommend that, yeah, you can take that initial feed from Merchant Center, download it, and as you transform it into this business data feed, see if you can add additional fields that will make your ads even more powerful. All right? Okay. So do we need to create a specific, okay, no, that one we covered already. Copy of the shopping feed. So yes, create a copy and create a business data feed. Now, if you have multiple conversions with different values, how does this get factored in? So if you have multiple conversions with different values, I would recommend that you switch to Target ROAS eventually. Not at first, okay? Initially start with Target CPA, let it run, let it finish learning, and then reach out to a Google rep, maybe even to our phone support team, right? And talk to them about, okay, how do I enable target return on ad spend for my Smart Display campaign? Because that is essentially what you should be doing. Yes, you shouldn't be then necessarily optimizing for the volume of conversions, but for the value, and that you do through the Target ROAS bidding strategy. Okay, scheduling. Is it possible to schedule a Smart Display campaign? Nope. So a Smart Display campaign is, because it's machine learning. Again, I know this is very painful to hear it, but the reality is that no human is able to, unfortunately, manage the display campaign as efficiently as machine learning will do for you, right? But if there's something, I'm wondering, why do you want to schedule it? Is it perhaps that your office is purely only open on Wednesday and you're tracking calls and you only want people to call in on the day when you're there? If that's the case, then again, reconsider what is your conversion action, okay? If there's something like, in these hours, you can't accept calls, so instead, maybe have a conversion that is a lead submission, and as the person submits that lead, make it very clear for the person that we will only call you back in the working hours the next day, okay? And then you will manage to not lose those audiences who choose to convert at a different time that you would think they should be converting, while also allowing Smart Display to optimize for this. Okay. Now, I'm skipping the product feed because that already... there is a question from Avi about, can you still use Smart Display campaign if you're not able to use remarketing? So yeah, totally. That's the benefit of it, right? That if you're a business that is not allowed to use remarketing and therefore similar audiences as well, run a Smart Display campaign because it's just going to tap into all of the other audiences outside of re-engaging your existing ones. And there's plenty of them on the display network. It's literally 95% of the population. Expect a higher target CPA because, as I mentioned, the remarketing CPA is the lowest. If you're looking for new audiences and you can't re-engage, the CPA will be higher because you're attracting new audiences. So just give it a higher target CPA bid to work with. Now, guys, fantastic questions, so many of them. I will have a look at them. If there's anything else that I haven't covered, I will answer on the YouTube channel. I thank you all very much for your attention, for your patience, and for your interest in this unique, amazing new campaign type. Also, feel free to post the feedback on the channel because that is something working with the product team that I really like to collect is an understanding of what's working and not working for you. And that is what we will use in improving the products. We ran out of time, so I wish you all success with advertising. I wish you a great rest of the week, and thank you so much for joining today. Bye.